In modern self-improvement circles, ego death is often sold as a spiritual shortcut. It's presented as a simple matter of letting go, the idea that if you can just dissolve your identity, you'll arrive at a state of perfect peace. But the clinical reality is different. When someone attempts to dismantle their ego without the necessary internal structure to support that expansion, the mind shatters. Exposing a weak psychological frame to the vast, unfiltered contents of the unconscious risks severe fragmentation rather than peace. This creates a structural requirement. To safely navigate self-transcendence, the ego must first be stable and highly integrated. You cannot relinquish a boundary that hasn't been fully formed. To see why, we have to use the formal definition of the ego. It isn't a measure of arrogance. In psychology, the ego is the executive processor, the internal manager responsible for maintaining the boundary between you and the rest of the world. Psychological growth isn't about destroying this manager. It's about understanding the hierarchical steps the manager takes to construct your reality. Identity begins at a neurological level with the feeling of agency, or FOA. This is the ego's baseline reality testing mechanism, operating as a background hum that confirms your physical actions belong to you. When you move your hand, the brain sends a motor command to your muscles and an internal memo to a prediction center. When sensory feedback matches that prediction, the system locks, generating the feeling you are the author. In conditions like schizophrenia, this system fails. The brain cannot reliably match its internal predictions with its actual movements, leading the individual to attribute their own thoughts or actions to external forces. When the baseline ability to predict our own origin fails, the boundary between self and other collapses, resulting in clinical disorientation. As we move from physical actions to psychological identity, we use the judgment of agency. This is the conscious thought process of claiming ownership over our life's successes and failures. To keep our internal story consistent, the ego filters objective reality. It smooths over data that doesn't fit our self-concept to maintain a sense of coherence. Immature ego structures do this aggressively, relying on defenses like denial or projection. They most push away any evidence that contradicts their rigid self-story. This filtering has a mechanical cost. Maintaining a rigid narrative while deflecting contradictory data drains the brain's finite executive fuel, a state known as ego depletion. Fighting reality and suppressing internal conflict leaves us with very little executive resource, resulting in a state of chronic burnout that halts further growth. To move past this burnout, the ego must mature into the autonomous stage. The ego is now stable enough to view reality as information rather than a threat. Carl Rogers described this efficiency as congruence. It occurs when there is minimal gap between your self-image, ideal aspirations, and actual gut-level experiences. A congruent ego can hold internal contradictions and paradoxes simultaneously. It no longer needs to waste energy on denial, being strong enough to tolerate ambiguity. This profound alignment marks the transition away from internal conflict, moving the ego into a state of complex, highly flexible integration. Achieving congruence ends the internal war of the immature ego, redirecting wasted psychological energy towards self-actualization. When the ego reaches this level of functional integration, it possesses the stability required for the final step. True transcendence is a volitional act of integration. It is the controlled overcoming of the barrier between the analytical, explicit system and the intuitive, implicit self. Carl Jung conceptualized this as the transcendent function, a mechanism that allows the conscious ego to synthesize its perspective with the broader contents of the unconscious. The ego intentionally relaxes its authorship filter, lowering its own boundaries without losing its executive stability. This allows the sense of agency to expand beyond the individual skin. It facilitates a connection to the collective through choice, rather than through a loss of control. The path of growth follows a hierarchy. The ego must become strong enough to consciously choose to relinquish its own borders. It is the shift from a rigid, highly defended self to a state that is fluid and fully integrated. What difficult truth or inner conflict are you currently blocking out to protect a fragile identity? And what energy could you unlock if you finally chose to integrate it?